Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the Budget Proposal for the Department of Energy for Fiscal Year 2019. First of all, I'd like to thank Secretary Perry for being here today, and just as a reminder to everyone, this committee has jurisdiction over all of the Department of Energy's civilian research and development. That's $10 billion, or about a third of their budget. I do want to say to members that the Secretary has to leave at 10:30 sharp in order to get to a meeting at the White House. And so I'm going to do two things so that we'll make sure we have plenty of time for members to ask questions. One, I'm going to put my opening statement in the record, and also would like to limit questioning to 4 minutes per person, and that way I think we'll have time for everybody. At this point, I'll recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Texas, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my statement, I want to welcome to the full committee Mr. Connor Lamb, who is one of our newest elected. And this is a very dynamic committee, as you will understand later, and could be better. A lot of Texans on this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing, and thank you, Secretary Perry, for finally appearing before us today. And it's good to see you again, our longest-serving Texas governor, and I knew him every day of it. As you know, this committee has jurisdiction over the Department of Energy's vitally important science and energy research and development activities, the laboratories and facilities. So I hope we can see you much more frequently, because we need your input, and I look forward to working with you for years to come. In that spirit, I'd like to highlight some remarks you've made recently that I appreciate and wholeheartedly agree. In the address to the ARPA-E Energy Innovation Summit in March, you told the audience that you hoped they would, and I quote, enjoy the many high-potential, high-impact technologies that ARPA-E has moved out of the lab and toward deployment. That's also one of the areas that I have great interest. You also announced that ARPA-E projects have attracted more than $2.6 billion in private sector follow-up funding. 71 projects have formed new companies, and 109 have gone on to partner with other government agencies to further their research. And you went on to say that, and again, I quote, ARPA-E is one of the reasons DOE has had and is having such profound impact on American lives. Secretary Perry, you've been singing my song, and yet, as I'm sure you're aware, you made these remarks just a few weeks after the administration proposed to eliminate ARPA-E for the second year in a row. You're also proposing 70% cut to research carried out by DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energies, a 37% cut to the Offices of Electricity and Nuclear Energy, and 31% cut to fossil fuel energy R&D. And last but certainly not least, you're again proposing to eliminate DOE's remarkably successful Loan Programs Office, which has been instrumental in launching the utility-scale PV industry, the construction of our first new nuclear reactors in 30 years, and are now supporting the commercialization of new carbon capture and reuse technologies for fossil energy systems. And so I have to ask, given your consistent praise for ARPA-E and DOE's energy technology and innovation programs more broadly throughout your tenure as Secretary of Energy to date, how do we make sense of this budget request? The department's arguments about the value of these activities fall on deaf ears at OMB. Did you even push back on any of these ill-conceived draconian cuts at all? By all credible accounts, American industry will not fund the activities that are proposed for elimination, no matter how much the administration would like to think so. The department could have heard from the industry directly, but for the second year in a row, we heard from the department officials that they did not formally engage with the private sector in deciding what activities we would cut, you would cut. And yet, that did not stop you from rationalizing these large cuts by simply stating that the federal role in our energy innovation pipeline should be strictly limited to support for so-called early-stage research without providing any clear definition for what that actually means. And then over and over again in this request, you state that the private sector is better suited to carry out anything that you're proposing to cut or eliminate entirely. But if you don't have any process to engage with the private sector before proposing, say, cut energy efficiency programs by 84%, and then you'll have to excuse me if I find it difficult to take your justification for this budget request seriously. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that every program the department currently implements is perfect. We should continue to identify small reforms and debate our priorities. We must be thoughtful investors of taxpayers' dollars. But I am confident that investing robustly in our national laboratories and early and appropriately reviewed later stage R&D is the right decision. With that, I'd like to thank you again for being here, and I look forward to a productive discussion this morning. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, and I'll introduce our only expert witness today, who is Rick Perry, the 14th Secretary of the United States Department of Energy. Secretary Perry attended Texas A&M University, where he was a member of the Corps of Cadets and one of A&M's 5 Yale leaders. After graduation, he was commissioned and served in the United States Air Force. He flew C-130 tactical airlifts in Europe and the Middle East until 1977, when he retired with the rank of captain and returned to Texas to enter the cotton farming business with his father. Secretary Perry served in the Texas House of Representatives and then as Texas Commissioner of Agriculture. He was elected Lieutenant Governor of Texas in 1998 and assumed the governorship in December 2000, when then Governor George Bush resigned to become President of the United States. In 2002, he was elected the 47th governor of the Lone Star State. As the longest-serving governor in Texas history, Secretary Perry oversaw the world's 12th largest economy from 2000 to 2015. Under his leadership, Texas set the pace for job creation, innovation, and population growth. During his tenure, Texas improved air quality while reducing emissions in carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxide. Besides guiding the Department of Energy, Secretary Perry also manages the 17 national laboratories home to the country's best scientists and engineers. I've had the privilege of working with Secretary Perry for over 30 years and very much appreciate his testifying before the Science Committee today. We look forward to his insights on the future of American energy and innovation. Governor, welcome. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Johnson, it's a privilege to be in front of you again. She's been mentoring me for nearly 30 years, so it's good to be back with you, and honored to appear before all of you today to discuss the President's 2019 budget request for the Department of Energy. And as an aside, let me just say I really appreciate your understanding and your flexibility with the cabinet member, the cabinet meeting that's been called, and so in respect to your time and for us to be as productive as we can, I'll try to keep my remarks and my answers as brief as I can to save us time. This fiscal year 2019, $30.6 billion budget request will help the Department of Energy fulfill the key objectives, that is, accelerating exascale computing, fostering and furthering our scientific and technological mission, modernizing our nuclear arsenal, addressing our Cold War environmental legacy, advancing energy production, and better protecting our infrastructure. I'd like to briefly highlight the outstanding work. Mr. Foster, you represent one of these 17 national labs, and we had the opportunity to go out to your area and look at one of them, and not a greater, I think, cheerleader do we have, a supporter of Fermi and Argon and the other 15 labs than you. These are incubators of innovation, and they're among America's greatest treasures. And I also want to highlight the DOE's supercomputing and other advanced technologies that are going to play a crucial role in confronting threats to our energy and national security infrastructure, and to maintaining America's leadership in science and medicine. There is no more appropriate place for this kind of massive computing power than at America's lead science agency, and that's the Department of Energy. And we also must regain leadership in the broader area of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Through our STEM Rising initiative and related activities, our department is promoting STEM programs, collaborating with students and teachers at every level of education. We also have a duty to advance our entire, our energy security by pursuing American energy independence, because we are innovating more. We're regulating less. We are producing more energy from more diverse sources more efficiently than anyone ever predicted a few short years ago. We're now the #1 combined oil and gas producing country in the world. I mean, that's fascinating when you think 15 years ago, Mr. Warbach, I mean, this is a stunning development. Just last year, we became a net exporter of natural gas. Today, we are exporting LNG to 27 countries on 5 continents. And thanks to that same innovation and that same drive, we are producing more energy cleaner than ever before. In fact, from 2005 to 2017, our economy was growing, and we led the world in reducing carbon emissions, cutting them by 14% over that period of time. Clearly, we don't have to choose between growing our economy and protecting our environment. But to achieve more complete energy security, we must ensure our energy actually gets delivered without interruption. And so my greatest focus as Energy Secretary is to ensure the reliability and the resilience of our energy grid. So this year we've requested a funding increase to strengthen cybersecurity, cyber defenses. We're establishing a new office. It goes by the acronym of CSER, Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, CESER. In the end, it will be you, so our elected representatives, who will decide how to best allocate the resources of our hard-working taxpayers. And I look forward to not only answering your questions, but working with you, taking your advice as we go forward to make this agency even more efficient and better prepared for the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I'll recognize myself for questions. My first question is this, that the Department of Energy is known for its development of technology, from hydraulic fracturing to supercomputing to better batteries for electric cars. And Mr. Secretary, I'm just wondering how important you think it is for technologies to try to be used to meet the challenge, for example, of climate change.
Yes, sir. Obviously, living in a world that has an environment that's pleasant, that's safe, is important. We were able to do that in the state of Texas while I was a governor. It's one of the things I'm really proud of. I mentioned that. You mentioned it in your remarks as well. During that 14-year period of time, we drove down nitrogen oxide levels by over 60%, SOx by over 50%, carbon dioxide by almost 20%. While we grew more than any other state in the nation, we added 7 million people to the population rolls of the state of Texas during that period of time. And I tell people, I said, you know what that means? That's a lot of pickup trucks. So,
True.
And so that's non-point source pollution. Your conventional wisdom was, well, you're growing a lot of vehicles on the road. You got all that petrochemical stuff going on down there, ozone, and so you got to be playing heck with your environment, but we didn't. And we didn't because we put thoughtful processes and we used technology, and we allowed technology. And that's where the national labs are going to continue to play a very important role to make sure that our, not only is it about job creation, but it's about addressing issues that are important, like the environment that we live in, and making sure that the emissions, CCU down in Houston, where we built now the biggest, largest, I think at this time still, carbon capture utilization plant in the world, where we're sequestering, I think, over 95%, or not sequestering, we're capturing over 95% of the carbon, and then shipping it over, using it for secondary recovery. These are the types of science that come out of the national labs that we can implement and see the type of results that I think you and the members of this committee are looking for.
Exactly. Mr. Secretary, also the department is known for its development and research into fusion energy, which might well be the solution to a lot of our energy needs in the future. There's an international effort called ITER, which may or may not be receiving the funding that they would like. And I'm just wondering how important you think that ITER effort is, and how important it is that the Department of Energy continue to fund the development of fusion energy.
Mr. Chairman, I think the fusion has the potential to really change the world. So taking that position, but also looking at, from time to time, one of the things that I ran into over the last 18 months as I became intimately knowledgeable about what the Department of Energy does, from time to time, we get involved with some areas where the expenditures are off the charts. And I'm not going to sit here and try to analyze this and say it's all been because of bad management or what have you, but I mean, the billions of dollars that we spent on the MOX facility out in South Carolina, in some of our environmental management cleanups. I mean, there have been some, I think questionable, historically questionable expenditures of dollars. ITER's one of those, and it was poorly managed. I mean, I don't think anybody argues that there was some management decisions made at that big consortium it's over in France. Now, with all of that said, I think the previous administration and this administration both stepped back from that and said, wait a minute, let's take a look at this and make sure that the dollars that we're going to be expending there, we're getting a good return on our investment. And that's exactly what we're doing, Mr. Chairman. We think that this, and they have new management. I've sat down with Mr. Bigot and we've discussed, and I'm getting comfortable that the management of ITER is indeed back on track. They're headed in the right direction. Okay. So, one of the things I learned as an appropriator back as a boy in Texas and as the governor was that I know how the appropriations process works, and I respect it greatly. Okay. And it's the members of this committee and the appropriators that are going to decide about, they expect me to be a good manager. And that's what I'm going to tell you is I'm going to be a transparent and a hard-working person to earn your trust from a management standpoint. Okay. And if you see fit that I'm going to try to give you the best information I can, but you see fit that projects like ITER need to be funded, we will give good oversight, and we will make them be as transparent as we can and try to get us the results that this committee wants.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. My time has expired. The gentlewoman from Texas, the ranking member, Ms. Johnson, is recognized for her questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I think that I appreciate your statement and agree with what you've said about the progress in Texas. We started from a very low ebb, and we've gone a long ways, but we have a long, long ways to go. Yes, ma'am. I guess my focus will be on the budget, because I think I heard you say that it's really up to this committee to make those budget authorization decisions. But we do have a budget before us that came over that does not necessarily, I think, reflect some of the things that you have spoken about. But you've also said you would take almost what we give you and to do the best you can to manage it. But how can you agree for the 70% cuts to the energy efficiency and renewable energy and support these cuts? Where do you say, did you have input on this, or what is your opinion on what we are facing as your budget before us, getting rid of ARPA-E and all that? Did you have any input on that, and where do you stand?
Ms. Johnson, one of the things that I think it's important to understand on the global look at the EERE and that energy efficiency and that side of the house, it's important for us to recognize that some of the dollars that were expended over, let's say, the last decade were in those early stage dollars, appropriately from my perspective, I might add, in some of the renewables, solar and wind. As those have matured, it's kind of like when I sent my kids off to college. That was a costly process. And then they graduated and went on and went to work, and I didn't expend those dollars because they had basically matured. Some of the things that you've seen in that side of this budget, that's the reason that it's occurred, and you've seen the reduction in spending because those have made maturations. And I don't think it's any indication at all that there's a lack of support for our renewables at the department. I mean, you know this, having lived in Dallas and Texas, no state developed more wind energy in the nation while I was the governor than Texas. As a matter of fact, we create more wind than all but 5 countries. So the commitment to the renewables is still there. I think as we I don't like to use the term ebb and flow, but as we transition away from farms of energy that are maturing into others, you'll see these changes in the budget. Now, with that said, I think we can always disagree that the total amount of money is the right amount of money. That, again, I respect this process greatly. You and I might not agree upon a total dollar amount in a particular line item.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do note the observation of the number of Texans on important leadership positions on this committee, and of course the Secretary having been the governor. We in Oklahoma sometimes are viewed as the buffer zone or the catalyst or whatever, but you can always tell a good Texan. If you refer to it as the Republic of Texas, they invariably smile, so you know they're a real Texan. That said, Mr. Secretary, I was pleased to see in the FY19 budget the refocus on the biological and environmental research programs on genomic science, particularly the funding included for 4 recently renewed bioenergy research centers. These centers provide fundamental science for better understanding of plant and microbial systems, allowing DOE researchers to work with industry to create the next generation of transformative bioenergy resources and bio-based products. Can you update the committee on the research goals for the bio-research centers?
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to introduce Paul DeBar. He's our Assistant Secretary for Science, right. And his shop, that's where that is. And Mr. Lucas, if I may, and just to remind you, we were a republic once.
Never a doubt in my mind.
Okay. So Paul DeBar.
And as an Oklahoman, as a wingman here to the Air Force officer, I thank you for this question. The bioenergy area in the area of BER is very important. Actually, we're focusing more resources on that. There's a few areas that we find particularly interesting. As you know, the DOE labs were at the forefront, along with NIH, in terms of gene editing, gene sequencing. A lot of people don't know that. And as a result, we have a lot of history and a lot of future ahead of us. First area that we're working on is in the area of precision medicine. This is tailoring specific therapeutic treatments to the individual genomics for a particular person. This is a very exciting area in the area of biotech and the genomics area for the department that we work on with other universities and the National Institutes of Health, which could have a monumental shift in where health goes in this country. Secondly, we continue to do a lot of work in the area of bioenergy, looking at different types of plants that could be used in a more efficient manner, more efficient on the land, more efficient with water, to look at applications associated with that. Thirdly, we do a lot also in another area of plant genomics, which could be used for biotech drug manufacturing, taking various genomic sequences that certain plants have and being able to use those to engineer a manufacturing of biotech drugs outside of having to grow the individual plants. It's a very important area that Lawrence Berkeley in particular, but a number of other of our labs that are leadership in, and so we're very excited about those opportunities.
Great, thank you.
Governor, just one final thought here in the time that I have remaining, just from a geographical reference. I'm fond of the Republic of Texas. I live 50 miles down the river from Canadian, so you know my geographical
exactly
location.
where you are.
And with that, I would like to just reinforce comments made by my colleagues about the importance, I think, of ARPA-E, how that leverages your technology abilities within the agency with private industry, and the potential to do great things, I think, exists in ARPA-E.
Yes, sir.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. And the gentleman from California, Mr. Barra, is recognized.
And this is an OTT?
Caught me off guard there. Thank you for appearing here, Mr. Secretary. I know we're in conversations with Saudi Arabia right now about their pursuit of nuclear energy and nuclear reactors. Obviously this would be a big deal. They're planning on spending about $80 billion to build 16 nuclear reactors over the next 25 years. And, there obviously is some concern as we're negotiating the 123 agreement. The Obama administration was never able to quite get that agreement completed because of concern over the Saudis potentially using those reactors for nuclear enrichment. If you could give us an update on how those negotiations are going. In a recent 60 Minutes interview, the Saudi Crown Prince suggested that if Iran were to pursue nuclear weapons, they certainly would be within their rights to pursue nuclear weapons as well. And with yesterday's pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, certainly there's the potential of that deal collapsing and the Iranians going back to their pursuit of nuclear ambitions. There's real concern in a bipartisan way in this body and in a bicameral way that we may enter into a 123 agreement that actually does allow the Saudis to pursue nuclear enrichment. And I'd be curious to get your perspective on that.
Mr. Barra, absolutely, and I think I share, along with I would suggest every one of the people on this committee, your concerns about a increase in proliferation of nuclear materials in the world, and that goes right to the point that we tried to make with the Saudi Crown Prince in our conversations with him and with his team, that not only will it send a powerful message if they go into an acceptable 123 with additional protocols, but that they do that, because if they don't, the message that's sent, if the Chinese or the Russians, which don't require any of that, not only does it send the message, I think the wrong message by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but it also sends the message to the United States that we're no longer the leader in the world when it comes to civil nuclear power. Westinghouse, best reactor builder in the world. You know, they've had their challenges from a business standpoint, but it wasn't because they're not really good at building reactors. It's because they got involved in the construction side of it, which is not their expertise. That's been straightened out. They have, you know, working their way. But the reactor side of this is very important, and that is the second point that we tried to really drive home to the Crown Prince was that if you want the best reactors in the world, you have to come to the United States, and you have to use Westinghouse. So yet to be seen, you know, what the kingdom's going to decide when it comes to who's going to be allowed to build those. But I think for us as Americans, for us that truly believe in nonproliferation, that is a powerful place for us to be and the goal that we need to go into every arrangement, that if the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia does not sign a 123 with us with additional protocols, the message will be clear to the rest of the world that the kingdom is not as concerned about being leaders when it comes to this issue, and they'll be losing a great opportunity to stand up and say the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a serious country when it comes to nonproliferation and to the development of nuclear power in the Middle East.
Great. We'll know that you've got bipartisan support and holding
sir.
firm with that 123
Thank you.
agreement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. The gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrbacher, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, you have every right to be proud that America is now energy independent. This didn't just happen. The fact is that there's been political elements and disagreements that, for example, would have stopped fracking in its place, which is the new system that's given us so much energy and given us natural gas, which has permitted that level of CO2 to go down, as you mentioned. Let me just note that as you take over your new responsibilities here, one of the most important responsibilities is to say no when things are aren't as good as other alternatives or more expensive. And I would hope that as you get into your job, that you take that part of your job very seriously. Quite frankly, building any new nuclear power plants based on the current technology is, I believe, not only a waste, but a danger to the American people and the people of the world. The old-style nuclear reactors, for example, the reactors you're talking about that you want to sell to Saudi Arabia, do they produce plutonium?
Yes, sir.
They do, okay. Why should we, when we are capable, we have the capabilities now of building a new generation of nuclear power that will not have plutonium left over, that can't melt down, that in fact will use the nuclear waste from the current generation as fuel and eat it up rather than having to have it here threatening us. I would hope that you take a very close look at that, and instead of just giving your support to ongoing projects like ITER, which has not seen any progress towards giving us a real energy source, but sure eats up a lot of money. And so I'd hope as you move forward in this job, and I know you take it seriously, I think Texans have a lot to be proud of about what you did down in Texas. And I will refrain from talking about all the wind that Texas produces. We think that that's enough. I won't go down that road. But let me just ask you this, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Shimkus of Illinois has a piece of legislation aimed at trying to offer us at least a moving forward with some kind of plan that will make it safer. Right now, the nuclear energy that's being stored throughout the country, including San Onofre, California, is enormously expensive.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not sure that it's safe to have all nuclear energy stored like that. Shimkus would reopen the Yucca Mountain debate. Do we have a position on that?
Yes, sir. From the standpoint of there are 38 states that have nuclear materials stored in less than satisfactory places, one of them being San Onofre. And I've got a great concern about San Onofre being in the circle of fire. It's exactly the same geological area that Fukushima was in. Right. And so
Correct.
The idea that you could have a major earthquake and with that a tragic event, that whole Inland Empire, you take that off of the economic, and it could be disastrous to our
Let
country.
me invite you to San Onofre, and we could go through that
Yes, sir.
together. If you haven't been there,
I've driven by it a number of times, but never been in it, so
that would be a good thing to do, and I appreciate your leadership. And again, leadership quite often means saying no.
Yes, sir.
And that's the hardest part of a job here in Washington, is saying no to people who want money.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. The gentlewoman from Nevada, Ms. Rosen, is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and Secretary Perry for being here today. I want to also talk a little bit about Yucca Mountain, because for decades, Nevadans have been fighting our state being a dumping ground for the nation's nuclear waste. Yucca Mountain is actually seismically active as well. But besides that, what I want to do is emphasize how Yucca Mountain is also a threat to our national security, because the site is located on DOE's National Security Site, which, as you know, provides DOE and other government agencies unique, high-hazard testing environments. Yucca Mountain's also adjacent to the Nevada Test and Training Range, which is the largest air and ground military training space in the contiguous United States, and it is home to 75% of all the stateside Air Force live munitions. So according to Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson, there is no transportation route, I repeat that, no transportation route across the NTTR that would not impact testing and training, even a route outside the range's boundary that might create encroachment issues. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to provide a map about Nevada sites into the record, please.
Without objection, will be made a part of the record.
Thank you. So, Mr. Perry, Secretary Perry, to your knowledge, has the DOE worked with the Department of Defense to address these concerns, the concerns of Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson, on the Yucca Mountain project?
Mr. Rosen, we're in pretty constant contact with our colleagues over at DOD in a host of different areas, that certainly being one of them. I think the important aspect of this issue from a DOE standpoint and the Secretary of Energy standpoint is that I have a requirement of law to take this licensing process forward. And this budget that we're talking about, I think there's 120 million, 110 of which is on the licensing side, and going forward with NERC to get an answer on the licensing side. So, you know, the debate about Yucca, whether it should be open, it shouldn't be open, it's been ongoing for a long time. I think $15 billion worth of time. But my responsibility here is not to tell you whether I'm for Yucca or against Yucca from the standpoint of it being a permanent facility. It's to follow the law, and the law says that DOE will go forward with the licensing side of it.
Might I suggest, Secretary Perry, that you work in collaboration with our Department of Defense to secure our Nevada Test and Training Range and secure our live munitions. And I'd like to reiterate what happens on the Nevada test site as far as testing of hazardous material. Yucca Mountain sits right there. It's also 60 miles from rare earth mines in California and not too much further on from the San Andreas Fault. So we need to talk about those things. You can't exist in a vacuum. I would urge you to work with the Department of Defense on discussing these highly important issues of national security.
We'll continue to do that with the DOD.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren, is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Grateful for your work and the team that you've put together. I want to commend you for the work you've been doing at DOE, and I keep hearing nothing but good things when I'm out talking to people back home in Illinois at Fermilab and Argonne. Grateful again for your visit and Mr. DeBar's visit. Had a great time with him there touring. And also excited that a group of the committee are going to be going to visit Argonne and Fermi this weekend. So important for us to recognize the incredible value, the treasure that we have with our national labs, and how important of a piece they are in this ecosystem of science. And so thank you. I'm also going to continue to work in a bipartisan fashion. We've got a National Labs Caucus here in the House to keep telling the story of the great work that's happening throughout our lab system, and grateful again for your commitment and support there. I've heard discussions about the National Science and Technology Council establishing a science infrastructure subcommittee. This is something this committee has worked on with a number of bills, including my legislation to authorize construction of the Long Base Neutrino facility, as well as upgrades to APS at Argonne and the Spallation Neutron Source at Oak Ridge. What are the current plans of this subcommittee? What are its goals? And will DOE and the Office of Science have a prominent role? I believe our DOE user facilities are truly the crown jewel of our research ecosystem, and I hope we can continue to work with you to see these facilities and researchers supported.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, for the best edification of the committee, I'd like to ask Paul again. This is right in his shop, and again,
That's
he
perfect.
can succinctly address this.
Great. Thanks.
Congressman, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you, you and many other members here at Argonne on Friday. I sit as a co-chair with Undersecretary Copen from NIST, from Commerce, on that particular committee that you asked about. We have a number of subcommittees on different sorts of research, and not just energy, but many other things across the whole of the federal government in terms of the infrastructure, much of which is based on labs. Much of which also has topics around lab-to-market topics that obviously both us and Undersecretary Copen are a part of. And so there's a number of different committees. I co-chair that, and items such as infrastructure build-out at national labs, such as at Fermi and Argonne, are an important part.
Great. Thanks, Mr. DeBar. Mr. Secretary, I commend your work at the department trying to find ways to get bureaucratic barriers out of the way so that the private sector can be nimble, bringing new ideas to the market. This House has passed legislation a number of times that would give lab directors the signature authority for technology transfer agreements and other cooperative research projects under $1 million. I had a brief discussion with Undersecretary DeBar about this provision, and I believe it to be in line with the administration's goals in the department. I wonder, would this provision concern you, and is this something we can work with you in trying to move forward on?
No, sir, it does not concern me.
Great. Again, thank you. We want to work with you. We're grateful for your commitment to all of the work in the Energy Department, but especially have a great passion for our labs, and want to thank you for your commitment there as well. With that, I'll yield back the balance of
We
my
share
time as
that
well.
passion, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Holgren. And the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Lamb, is recognized.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I was encouraged to hear you say in the opening that your greatest concern is the reliability and resilience of the electrical grid. And I am very concerned about the challenges that the nuclear plants in my state of Pennsylvania now face. We have thousands of hardworking men and women who work at these plants every day, and they work hard to ensure that we have the reliable source of energy, the carbon-free source of energy provided by these nuclear plants. You also noted the concerns of cyber attacks and cyber threats to the grid, and I know that some of these nuclear plants, like Beaver Valley, which is close to where I live, are almost completely independent of the internet. I mean, the control room is amazing. It's a large analog operation that would be resilient and reliable in the event of a cyber attack on the rest of our grid. So I know that your agency is considering the 202C request from First Energy related to baseload capacity. I'm not going to ask you to weigh in on that this morning. I saw your comments that 202C may not be the way we decide is the most appropriate or the most efficient way to address this, and you seem to believe that there are other options for the nuclear plants, especially besides 202C. So I was hoping you could fill us in. What do you see as other options on this issue?
Well, I'm looking for a solution. I'm looking for results. Process kind of wears me out from time to time, and my point is, the 202C is an economic issue. I mean, that's approaching this from an economic standpoint, and I think it's really important for us as a country to look at this for what you and I think understand it to really be about. And it's about the national security of our country. of keeping our plants, all of them, online, being able to deliver energy, no matter whether it's a natural disaster that we might see from a polar vortex, or it's something more nefarious as a cyber attack from a terrorist state or some entity with bad intent for the United States. So we're looking at a number of ways to approach this. I know that the Defense Production Act is one of those ways to address that we're looking at very closely as well. So having resiliency and reliability in our grid is as important to our national security as anything that I can think of. And making sure that the plants that we have today supported reliably with the fuel, and obviously nuclear is one of those, and there are coal plants out there that fit into that. I might just make the statement of fact that by 2040, the world will still be reliant upon 77% of fossil fuels of driving that energy that's being produced.
And I've seen that as well, Mr. Secretary. So I just want you to know that you have a partner here in trying to find other solutions on this issue. I will be happy to help in any way, and my staff will certainly reach out. Along that line, we have seen states pass some legislation to try to address this issue and to try to correct some of the market failures, especially for nuclear plants. Do you support the efforts of states like New Jersey and Illinois and New York that have taken on this issue and tried to develop their own solutions to correct some of these failures?
Yeah. Well, I wrote a book about the 10th Amendment, so I would be pretty hard-pressed for me to not say that I don't believe that states have a very important role. I think there is another issue that's a side issue, but directly to this. Do states have the right to block a pipeline across their state that will have a national security implication or an economic implication on individuals? And that's a whole other issue, but it's one I hope you and I can continue to have a conversation on. That will, the fight there will be the state's sovereign ability to make a decision versus the national security of this country.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, is recognized.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Howdy.
It's great to see you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We didn't tell these other states that Texas has our own grid primarily.
They probably already know that.
Yeah, I'm just saying. The gentleman from California, Mr. Rawbacker, will be.
We'd like to keep it that way.
Well, amen. Let's talk about that 10th Amendment. And your book is on sale, right? About the 10th Amendment?
Very much on sale.
Just saying. I'm pleased to see the funding requested in the FY19 budget includes a request for what's in my bill, a versatile neutron source. Dana, you'll like this, the next round of nuclear reactors. My act is called the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act. It's clear that we need progress on this facility. This is where we can build the next round of reactors to move more quickly if we're going to meet the needs of the advanced reactor community. So, Secretary Perry, I guess, I don't know how much you've looked at that bill that we've got coming down the line. You know, we're getting outstripped by Russia in nuclear innovation, and that's totally unacceptable. That's totally unacceptable. So I'd like for you to think about it, commit, if you would, to the funding of the versatile test reactor and make that a top priority in energy R&D. It looks like maybe Mr. DeBar has got some experience on that, or no?
You want to just you pitch your soft one?
Yes, yes, sir. Having run a reactor in my younger days, this is an important area. We've asked for $148 million as part of the 19 budget request around advanced reactors. In addition, SMR reactors as another area that we're very much focused on. So this is an area that is important, and I'd also like to point out for Congressman Beyer in Virginia, we just also the big CBAF nuclear physics facility that we just inaugurated this last week that had ribbon cutting on. shows another area of leadership in the nuclear area that we do for the country.
Yeah, Mr. Weber, I think it's, this is exactly down the line that Mr. Rohrbacher was making reference to from the standpoint of the old way of building civil nuclear reactors. It'd be like kind of the old way they built cars. I mean, the technology's changed, and we need to take advantage of the technology. We need to be a part of the technology. We need to be, and I might, let me just finish up by saying, the work that we're doing at Idaho National Lab is right along this line with the advanced reactors, and the funding of the national labs directly affects your point here. And
Sure.
INL is the one of the lead labs that's dealing with advanced nuclear
Right, and back to Mr. Rohrbacher's point, we're going to need an advanced fuel, so there's going to have to be R&D on fuel for this advanced reactor, which part of the discussion has been, we can take some of that old fuel, whether it's military grade, whatever kind of fuel it is, we can actually investigate and do the research on how to use that fuel in some of these advanced reactors and maybe do away with some of the storage. As you know, South Texas Nuclear Project, when I was a state rep, was in my district, and we watched them change fuel rods. So it's very, very important. You mentioned the 38 states, I think, that store it on site. That's just not sustainable. So we would also ask you all to commit to not only the advanced nuclear reactors and the versatile neutron source, but also to research on the fuel for that next round. Well, are y'all able to do that?
Yeah, well, we have some work going on now with the high assay,
Right.
Low enriched uranium that I think fits the description of what you're talking about right there.
Sure. Well, I
And,
appreciate that. And Mr. DeBar, you're going to be with us at the labs this weekend, I believe.
Yes, sir. I look forward to being there with you.
Okay. Well, bring the secretary with you, I'm just saying. So, but thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weber. The gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Our nation has some of the best scientists, researchers, programmers, and engineers in the world, but without strong investments in research and development, we fall behind. We risk falling behind our international competitors. This proposed budget takes us in the wrong direction, and I want to align myself with my colleagues who have objected to eliminating ARPA-E. And I'm glad to see that the administration is supporting increased advanced scientific computing research, but foreign governments like China are much more aggressive with their investment in exascale computing. We're falling behind there. This could have serious implications for our U.S. leadership, for national security, economic competitiveness, and innovation. I'm disappointed to see that the Department of Energy's budget proposal would make significant cuts to the development of clean energy technologies, including water power. In my state of Oregon, Oregon State University is a global leader in marine renewable energy research and development. The Pacific Marine Energy Center relies on federal investment from the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy to establish the nation's fully energetic on-grid wave energy test facility off the Oregon coast. Yep. This facility will be able to test wave energy, converters that harness energy of ocean waves and currents and turn it into electricity. Hydropower has had tremendous potential to become a major source of electricity for the United States and the world, and other countries are ahead of us here. Mr. Secretary, your budget proposal cuts funding for hydropower research and development by more than 57%. So do you agree that this country should be reducing our dependence on fossil fuels? And if so, why is the department pursuing such severe cuts for federal energy research investment?
Yes, ma'am. Let me just say in a global way, we do support the renewables. We can argue about the level of funding, which is what the appropriations process is all about. We are continuing to fund the program, and I think is it Oregon State?
Oregon State University
Yes,
has
ma'am.
the facility.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was at Oregon State that is, and we're still funding that. So the support is still there, certainly. Again, the level of funding we can discuss back.
Well, Mr. Secretary, with a 57% cut, that's serious, and as someone whose responsibility it is to advise the president, I hope that you will advise the president that this is a good investment to invest in renewable energy. And also, Mr. Secretary, I was glad to see you mention the importance of the labs. The National Energy Technology Laboratory is in Albany, Oregon, and they're working to make our energy systems more efficient. They're developing new sensors and controls for power plants and our grid, designing materials that can be used in extreme high-temperature environments, and advancing carbon capture technologies to reduce emissions. These efforts should be a model for the energy industry nationwide, but the fiscal year budget justification discussed a phased approach to consolidate the NETL location. What is the status? It's unclear from your proposal. Does the department intend to close the NETL Albany location? And can you please provide us with an update on the possible consolidation of the NETL sites?
So to answer your question directly, there are no NETL reorganization plans being discussed that would result in the closure of your facility out at Albany, Oregon. They are still continuing to focus on advanced power applications and material performance research, geospatial data analysis. So in a nutshell, no.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I yield
Yes,
back,
ma'am.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. And the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. Based on the testimonies that we've heard in committee, I'm concerned about the uncertainty in the way we assess the greenhouse gas emissions associated with blending ethanol in our fuel supplies. As you know, being accurate in these estimates depends on integrating the life cycle effects of land use changes in the growing of corn and other feedstocks for ethanol production. We should add these emission impacts into the estimate to get a full and accurate picture. Looking at the full life cycle, some scientists contend that the greenhouse gas implications of land use changes outweigh any savings in burning ethanol compared to fossil fuels. A University of Michigan study was particularly enlightening about the life cycle aspects of ethanol, and I asked Mr. Chairman unanimous consent to enter into the record a study conducted by Professor John DeChico.
Without objection, that'll be made a part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. According to his study, despite the purported advantages of biofuels created from crops such as corn, soybeans cause more emissions of climate change causing carbon dioxide than gasoline. The study further remarks that carbon neutrality has really been an assumption. To verify the extent to which the assumption is true, you really need to analyze what's going on in the farmland, where the biofuels are being grown. People haven't done this in the past, and they felt like they didn't need to. It's truly puzzling to me that we aren't looking at the full life cycle of biofuels production. With gasoline, we take into account not just the tailpipe emissions, but carbon emissions during the drilling, the transportation, the refueling, and other parts of the process. Mr. Secretary, I'm working on legislation to authorize the Department of Energy to conduct research and development necessary to refine our models to better estimate the overall impact of ethanol fuels on greenhouse gas emissions. I believe it's essential that we have an accurate estimate of these impacts to develop policymaking on such fuels. Ethanol is a very poor fuel product substitute, and mandating its use has serious implications for food supplies and prices. Will you pledge to work with me on legislation to improve the basic tools necessary for assessing the life cycles and emissions of ethanol?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. And the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster, is recognized.
Well, thank you. And Secretary Perry, I have to say how much I really enjoyed the day that we spent together visiting the two national labs that, you know, one of which I worked at for many years, another one which I currently represent. And, you know, I just want to say that your enthusiasm for the fundamental science really shone through on that visit. The Department of Energy has done well with, technical wizards running it, and also with people with more political backgrounds who really understand and appreciate what it does. And I just want to say how much, I appreciate that, as well as, of course, your specific enthusiasms for the upgrades at Argonne and at Fermilab, which have already been mentioned here. Also, when I look over, the subject of this and the budget, we'd had some sort of off-the-record discussions there. And you mentioned in your opening remarks the return on investment, which I think is the right phrase for this. And so when you look at programs like the ERE investments, where third-party independent estimates have said that between the investments between 1976 and 2008 of about $15 billion generated economic benefits to the United States of about $388 billion. That's a return on investment of 24 to 1, an enormous number, and you'd be hard-pressed to find any industrial sector with a comparable return on investment. And, you definitely get that. On the other hand, if you look at this, at the budget proposal, you're going to, there are things like the Loan Program Office of the Advanced Tech Vehicle Manufacturing Program. These are things that have turned a profit for the taxpayer in the sense of returned money to the taxpayer. So technically the return on investment there is more than infinite. And yet when you see these things proposed to be zeroed out, how do you react in the internal debates on that, and how do you go forward when you, I'm confident, advocate for this sort of program and then see the final proposal being cut?
Mr. Foster, as you said, you and I have had some relatively lengthy conversations about this specific area of the budget. As I try to remind people that, again, I really respect this process. I grew up in it, having been an appropriator, having been an agency head, having been the chief executive of a state that was fairly successful. We actually created a program back in Texas called the Emerging Technology Fund that we oversaw, and I argued vehemently to some of my own colleagues on my political party that didn't think government needed to be picking winners and losers, and I shared with them that we pick winners and losers every day.
Yeah.
But
I really appreciate, you actually get this issue in depth, and I just really appreciate that. So keep fighting, and I wish you better luck in future debates here. Now, to change the subject tightly, your predecessor, one of the really great things he did with the scientific expertise of the National Lab was to really engage that expertise in the Iran nuclear negotiations, that he was providing real-time input to the negotiating team and to those of our allies on the detailed technical questions that are an essential part of this. So could you describe the extent to which that technical and scientific expertise at the national labs, both the science labs and the weapons labs, have been engaged in the latest strategic decisions by the White House?
Yeah, and it's a lot broader. I know news of the day is the Iranian deal, the JCPOA. But the point is the Department of Energy is the agency of which the verification of nuclear materials and nuclear activities around the world, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Iran, our agency is where the expertise lies. National labs obviously play a very important role with that, but also in the NNSA side of our house as well. So I'm not sure there is an agency of government with more expertise.
So my question is, why have we seen very little evidence of that expertise being engaged? Or can you give specific examples where it has been in these latest decisions?
Yes, sir, I can, but I'm not sure that some of it we can talk about in this room.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yes, sir, but I'll be more than happy to come and sit down with you in a classified environment and share with you, I think, the questions that you place forward.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Babin, is recognized for questions.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. My favorite governor. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Appreciate your long years of service to our Lone Star State. I'd like to have a graph put up, please, from 2010, from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Let me make a note here. The graph all the way to the right, these are subsidies per unit of production per megawatt hour. All the way to the right, that is not to scale. You can see for solar power, the American taxpayer were subsidizing solar energy per megawatt hour at a rate, if that graph was to scale, we would have to be in about a 3-story building. That's how high and how large the amount of subsidies that we're giving solar energy. You can see that wind is the next one. It is to scale. And then a few years later, in 2013, solar is still way up there above everything else. It's declining, but still unacceptably high as far as I'm concerned. This is probably the result of the Obama stimulus that was done at that point in time, thankfully winding down than anything else. To the best of our knowledge, this is the last time that the EIA has published this particular chart, laying out just how much hardworking taxpayers in our district and across the country are paying for energy subsidies. What happened? Environmentalist groups, along with their allies in Congress and the Obama administration, pushed for and apparently succeeded in keeping this very simple, easy-to-read chart away from the public eye. I also have here the most recent report published just last month from 2016, which, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record, if that's possible.
Without objection.
Thank you. There is no such table in 2016's report explaining how much that we are paying per megawatt hour for energy. So I understand that since we rely on them to call and report impartial data, the Institute for Energy Information Administration, it has a certain amount of autonomy from your direct management. But I would ask you, Mr. Secretary, would you be willing to offer your support for them to resume producing this same chart in future research products? Americans deserve to see their tax dollars, the destinations of where their tax dollars are going. Would you be
Yes, sir,
willing
absolutely.
to do that?
And I think it makes abundant good sense for the EIA to put that forward and make it public, and so the American people can take a look at how their tax dollars are being.
Absolutely. Thank you, and I really appreciate that because here we are in the age of energy independence here in the United States with all the developments in fossil fuel production, and do the American taxpayers need to continue that type of mammoth subsidies for this type of energy? Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Babin. And the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here to talk with us about your department. And I was glad to hear from Mr. Foster and others how much time you've spent looking at our national labs, and which is a great asset to our country, just miles and miles of brilliant people all over the country coming up with things that are going to change our future. One of the things I'd like to focus on today has to do with something that's going on at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And that is the National Ignition Facility. I have, Livermore Lab is not my district, but it's something I've been interested in for a long time, and I've followed since its inception. I was glad to hear you say this morning that fusion has the potential to change the world. We know fusion exists because we have a sun, but we're not sure when we will achieve it. We're achieving fusion now, we're just not achieving ignition. And when we do, that's a game changer for the world. So given the potential benefits and the money that we spent to make this a facility a reality, it was disappointing to see the budget recommendation. Now, I know that the secretaries don't always get the last say on what is requested. The OMB has a big role, and we all served with Mick Mulvaney when he was here in the House, and I got along well enough with Mick when he was here, maybe better than in his current position. I was concerned that the budget would effectively result in a 40% reduction of shots at the NIF from 400 to 250. It would eliminate 160 jobs out of the 750 associated with that. It even eliminated funding for General Atomics, again, not in my district down in San Diego, that provides the target fabrication, which would actually increase the costs. If you don't have a target, you don't have a program. If you have targets, but you eliminate funding for the only source of those targets, you're going to increase the cost. So I'm wondering, I know that the Appropriations Committee is working on this. It's possible that some changes will be made here. But I'm just wondering if you can talk about what you think about fusion and NIF's future. And I want to say something else. You know, the new graduates in high-density physics don't necessarily want to work only on the weapons program. They want to work on science programs. And if we eliminate our pipeline of physicists into these labs by cutting the science, we're not going to be able to do the stockpile stewardship program, which is the main function, of course, of the National Ignition Facility. So I wonder if you could comment on any of those things.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And I agree with your observation about the intellectual pipeline. And one of the reasons that we are valiantly trying to express our support for Westinghouse so that the United States can maintain its position on the reactor side. It's just like kids, when I was going to college, all the really smart kids wanted to be nuclear engineers. And for about 40 years, because of benign neglect and some other events, some accidents, et cetera, nuclear power, civil power became kind of out of favor. This fusion side of thing gives us the opportunity. And I think we can reasonably have our disagreements about, you know, we are not going to have the funding for every worthy initiative. We know that. But we can have these conversations back and forth, which are important, and whatever this committee and Congress decides on from the standpoint of your priorities, we're going to manage them as well as can be done.
I'll thank you, and I know my time is up. I'd just like to say we spent a lot of money building this facility, and to walk away from it after we've built it, you know, now that China's on our heels, you know, we want to be the leader. We don't want to be behind China on this. So thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Ms. Lofgren. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Dunn, is recognized for his question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, and your undersecretaries for joining us here today. I found a lot to celebrate in looking at your budget, but I'd like to focus on a small niche in it. That's the medical use, the healthcare use of medical isotopes. So when Undersecretary DeBar was with us here back in January, we discussed the market availability of a variety of medical isotopes and how the isotope program in the Department of Energy is actually run more like a business than it is an agency. And I was just wondering where in this budget are we looking to invest in American capabilities to generate the full array of medical isotopes so that we're not dependent on foreign sources for high-priority medical isotopes?
Yeah. This kind of fits into the same arena as some of our rare earth minerals as well. Just that the United States is going to be, I think, required to supply these ourselves, and for us to do the science, to do the funding of this, so that we are not beholden to countries around the world that may not have our best interest in mind. You know, I think about cobalt and the importance that cobalt is going to play. Lithium, the importance that lithium-6 is going to play going forward in the pit production for the weapons side of things. So focusing and being dependent upon U.S.-based sources of these very important elements is a focus of the department, and you know that we will continue to prioritize the funding for these types of programs. And as I've shared with Ms. Lofgren, you know, there are a lot of worthy initiatives out there that we don't have all the funding for them all. But in this area, I think that is a priority of the administration. It is a priority of our agency.
I'm glad to hear that. We see a lot of dependence on the newer isotopes in PET scanning, for instance, but not just PET scanning, also in therapeutics. And so I just want to make sure that the DOE is facilitating the development and actual construction of sufficiently energetic accelerators and some reactors. We need reactors too.
Mr. Dunn, if I can just take a little bit of a turn away from that and talk about on the supercomputing side of things, we're standing up an office that's going to be referred to as Artificial Intelligence Big Data Initiative, ABBY. And the focus there is going to be on precision medicine. We were out at Lawrence Livermore talking to some of their folks who are working with University of California, San Francisco neuroscientists about managing all of this big data. It's why our supercomputing investment is so important. And on precision medicine is one of those. I mean, the great progress that I think Dr. Babin in the future is going to be in the ability to manage all of this big data and those supercomputers, and 5 of the 10 fastest supercomputers in the world belong to the Department of Energy, and soon, because of Argonne and the work that we're going to do with Fermi and Oak Ridge, we're going to be back in the position of being the #1, and how long we last as #1 is going to be up to us. But anyway, this precision medicine, there's not much I'm more excited about than what we see with our ability to manage all of this big data focused on precision medicine.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to spending this weekend at Argonne Lab, studying that with Undersecretary DeBar, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. And I believe now we're going to go to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Secretary Perry, it's good to see you again, and it's good to see the work you continue to do in terms of visiting the national labs and supporting the DOE workforce. I want to ask you about 2 important programs, however, within the Office of EERE. The Weatherization Assistance Program is the largest residential energy conservation program in our nation. It reduces the energy burden on low-income families and creates jobs. The State Energy Program enables states to assist with energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, as well as develop critical energy emergency preparedness and response plans. As a former governor, you likely have witnessed the value of these programs, and you understand that on-time delivery of weatherization and state energy program funds to states is crucial to ensuring these programs continue to run and run effectively. For weatherization, most states expect this funding on July 1. Will you ensure that weatherization state grantees and state energy program grantees will receive these funds on time this year?
Yes, sir.
I think that's critical. Turning to a different DOE office, do you believe that the Office of Electricity research programs are valuable in terms of their potential to improve grid reliability and resilience through technologies such as storage, microgrids, and other smart grid technologies?
I do, Mr. Tonto. I think it's important that we, again, recognize, and I can't remember who, I think it was Mrs. Johnson, I was having the conversation earlier about the prioritization, and as some of these programs mature, then the funding will obviously fall off for them as we look to the next big thing that's out there. And I think this fits right into this area that you're making comment about as well.
Well, earlier this year, DOE announced the creation of the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. And I'm not necessarily opposed to this reorganization, but I would like to understand how it might affect existing programs that will remain within the Office of Electricity. Yeah. Cybersecurity is an important issue that deserves to be elevated, but it should not be done at the expense of other critical programs. Yeah. So are you committed to ensuring that there are sufficient resources and personnel for the Office of Electricity grid modernization and energy storage programs, which are also essential for improving grid reliability?
Yes, and we are continuing to fund beyond batteries is in that shop. Hydrogen R&D is in that shop. When I was out, I believe we were at Savannah River. We were looking at hydrogen fuel. And I don't want to get deep in the weeds here, but this is pretty exciting stuff when you look at hypersonic aircraft and the ability to be anywhere in the world, Mark, in, I mean, literally 4 hours. And you can do that because of this hydrogen fuel. So there's still a lot of exciting work to be done in the EERE. Again, you know, we can have our disagreements about line item to line item, but the commitment is still there to come up with the new big things and to prioritize them and what have you. Caesar got moved over and split out from that because of the very special focus that needs to be on cybersecurity in this country today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. The President's budget request proposed a 74% cut to smart grid research, a 67% cut to clean energy transmission and reliability, and an 81% cut to energy storage R&D. So if this administration is truly committed to improving grid reliability and resiliency, then these proposed cuts need to be rethought and removed. So I appreciate whatever assistance you can provide in making certain that these stabilizers are there. They're essential. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tonko. And the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Perry, I very much appreciate your service to your country and your continued commitment to restore energy dominance of America in your current position. I represent South Louisiana, the epicenter of LNG expansion for the entire world, and the district I represent is commonly referred to by my Lone Star colleagues as East Texas. So keeping that in mind, I'd see a great partnership between the state of Texas and the state of Louisiana as we seek energy dominance for our nation. I very much appreciated your comments regarding management efficiency and operating within the parameters allowed to your department by the appropriators of this Congress. I also support the President's overall effort to reduce the size and scope of the agencies of the federal government that devour the people's treasure. So I very much appreciate your approach, Mr. Secretary, regarding the efficient operation of the Department of Energy and the agencies therein. I'd like to ask you about grid security. The Grid Modernization Laboratory Consortium, the GMLC, is committed to advancing development of new tools and technology to increase grid resilience, and particularly from cyber attacks. How does protection against EMP fit within that endeavor, and just how much focus are you place upon it? I personally think it's a great threat to our nation, and within the confines of this environment, obviously being a more open discussion, could you share with us what DOE is doing regarding EMP protection of our grid?
Yes, sir. I'll just speak in a generalization that that is certainly one of the challenges that we have. We recognize it. The work that they're doing at Idaho National Lab with the test grid there, they're addressing it. It is, I think, the appropriate thing for me to share with you at this time. The consortium supports, you know, the critical research and development in a host of different areas. Advanced storage, beyond batteries that I mentioned earlier, is certainly one of those clean energy integration standards and test procedures, and a number of other really key modernization areas, the least of which is not making sure that the grid is protected from cyber attacks, from EMP type of attacks, and other anomalies that could be released upon our grid, so that the American people will know with some assurity that when they flip the lights on, the switch on, the lights will come on.
Thank you for that answer, and just please share with this committee regarding the budget and what you envision as required to secure our nation's grid against EMP. Are you satisfied with the budget that you received? Can you work within those parameters?
Yes,
Do
sir.
we need to help you by increasing that budget?
We can work within the parameters.
Thank you, sir, for your answer. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Mr. Secretary, we know you have to leave for a cabinet meeting. Thank you for spending the time you have with us, and I understand Mr. DeBar can continue to stay and answer members' questions. Mr. DeBar is the Undersecretary for Science, so I think he'll be able to address most of the members' comments and questions after the Secretary leaves. Let me also say that I'm going to need to excuse myself, Mr. DeBar. I have a judiciary markup that's ongoing, so I'm going to head there. But we appreciate, again, Mr. Secretary, your being here. Mr. DeBar, your being willing to stay. I know we have at least 3 members more on either side, and up next is the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Christ. So, Mr. Secretary, as soon as you leave, we'll recognize Mr. Christ to address his questions to Mr. DeBar.
Governor, I wish I could stay and hang out with you.
Wish you could, too.
Good to see you, sir.
It's good to see you, sir.
My day job requires me to walk across the way, but if there, in all seriousness, to each of the members that are still here, if there are questions that you need me or want me to address personally, I will make that happen in some form or fashion. But I'm leaving a very capable fellow right here. Although he could not get into Texas A&M, he had to go to the Naval Academy. They trained him up pretty well. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary DeBar, for being able to stay here and help us out today. My hometown, which is the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, was one of the first cities in the country to commit to transitioning to 100% renewable energy. It's a lofty goal, and I commend the city for being proactive in reducing carbon emissions. However, I am concerned that the cuts to the energy research and development within this budget proposal will make that goal much more difficult. Those cuts happen to include a 66% cut to renewable energy, an 80% cut to energy storage research and development within the Office of Electricity, and complete elimination of the Loan Programs Office, just to name a few. Do you think that this budget proposal will spur the kind of American innovation that's needed to help my hometown of St. Petersburg and other communities meet their clean energy goals?
Thank you, Congressman and Governor. I very much appreciate that question.
Certainly.
As the Secretary said, line items on budgets are subject to your appropriation and your focus. Our focus is to take the resources that you give us and to maximize that. And we are very excited. I think, as you may know, the cost effectiveness of solar and wind and other renewables in the last decade has dramatically improved, in large part because of the department in the National Lab Complex. Another area is also in batteries and storage. And so what we're trying to do is to try to take not only the great research that you fund, but also try to push it out into the market, and also, very importantly, push it out into the market so that it's manufactured here in the United States. And so those are the areas that we're focused on. And we continue to take the resources that you give us and build on the accomplishments in all those and many other areas for St. Petersburg and other localities that want to attack it that way.
Great, thank you. Earlier this year, the President imposed a 4-year tariff on solar cells. I understand that you may not have had any direct involvement with that decision, but I have some very serious concerns about the impact it's having on our domestic solar industry. The Solar Energy Industries Association says that this tariff could cost as many as 23,000 American jobs this year alone. Meanwhile, as far as I am aware, no one has really given an estimate as to how many manufacturing jobs would be created. That plus the 72% cut to solar in this budget makes me think that the solar industry may be under fire. What is the Department of Energy planning to do to support those companies, their employees, and the solar industry as a whole when they have negatively impacted by this tariff?
Thank you. So the primary focus for the department is around innovation and technology. That is our primary focus, sir. As you said, we are not involved in some of those points that you were just mentioning. So what we're really focused on, and I'll talk about solar, is around what's the next technology. And it's great that there's been significant improvement in cost and therefore affordability and applicability within for localities to deploy solar and wind and others. But a big focus for us is what's next. What can we continue to move down the cost structure and develop those technologies? So on solar, for example, perovskite crystals is a new area that we think could continue to drive down potentially the cost curve and make it even more affordable for St. Petersburg and other places to attack. And once again, we're very focused on that, and we're very focused on, once again, those new technologies hopefully being developed and built here.
Great, thank you, sir, I appreciate that. I want to switch gears and talk briefly about offshore drilling. I know that the Interior Department handles that issue primarily, but as governor of Florida when Deepwater Horizon exploded, and now as a congressman representing a coastal district, offshore drilling is always at the forefront of my mind. In Florida, our economy is really dependent upon our environment, vis-a-vis tourism. The threat that offshore drilling poses to our oceans and coastal communities is not worth the risk, in my opinion. I know that may be different where the Secretary is from in Texas, where drilling does significantly contribute to the economy. I simply ask that you appreciate that states like mine are concerned with the administration's proposal and that you share our concern with the Secretary as well as other members of the Cabinet as appropriate. And I appreciate you being here again. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully you're the right individual to ask, but if not, if you would please relay this question to Secretary Perry. The Trump administration says it wants to revive the nuclear industry because developing new nuclear projects is critical to the long-term viability of the nuclear industry. Currently, the Vogtle plant is under construction, and there is also an additional proposal to finish 2 nuclear plants at Bellefonte in my congressional district. Hopefully you are aware of them. Many billions of dollars were spent by TVA on the 2 Bellefonte plants, and completion was substantially underway before the spending of those monies was stopped. If those plants are completed, that will bring thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in private sector money to the economies of Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, as well as creating a reliable source of nuclear power with essentially no greenhouse gases. It is important to have viable financing support through programs like the Department of Energy loan guarantees, and I understand that an important goal of the Energy Policy Act of 2005 is to encourage the construction of more nuclear plants, including those involving public-private partnerships via programs like those Department of Energy loan guarantees. That being the case, and before you respond to my 2 questions, let me add that Undersecretary Menendez, who appeared before our committee, and his staff have been in communication with us, and we appreciate their efforts. So here are the questions. First, can you comment on the status and future of the Department of Energy loan guarantee program as it pertains to the Bellefonte project specifically or else generally? And second, will the administration commit to expanding America's nuclear power fleet?
Thank you, Congressman. So on your first question, yes, in addition to talking with your office, the Loan Program Office has been engaged in talking with the team that has the option to purchase the Bellefonte plant, and they're very much continuing those conversations. And within the context is what's the authority, what's the what is required in order to meet the requirements of a loan is ongoing with them. So I can confirm that that's taken place as well as the conversations with your office directly. Around the area of commercial nuclear in general, I think as the Secretary said several times, making references to Westinghouse and development, as well as both his and my comments around the request on the advanced nuclear program, as well as on safe fuel that we just issued a new FOA on this last week, is a high degree of focus for us. It's important for us as a country to continue our leadership on a broad range of issues for commercial nuclear, and we appreciate the consideration for that request in the budget.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Byer, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by submitting for the record, if there's no objection, a letter from 87 bipartisan members of the House to Chairman Simpson and Ranking Member Capter on appropriations on ARPA-E, Energy Innovation Hubs, and EFRCs.
Seeing no objection.
Thank you very much. Undersecretary DeBar, we live with yesterday's tragic news of President Trump's decision to withdraw from JCPOA, the Iran deal. Secretary Perry's predecessor, Dr. Moniz, who's a nuclear physicist, was deeply and extremely involved in the building and of the negotiations that surrounded the deal. Do you have any evidence that Iran was failing to meet its obligations under the JCPOA, or any reason that would justify the U.S.'s reneging on its commitment to JCPOA?
I apologize, Congressman. I don't have any, nor have I participated in any conversations with the department around that topic.
I wonder, I'm far down the pecking order, but it would be wonderful in the appropriate way to request that we pass these questions on to Secretary Perry. I try to get these back within 24 hours if possible. So.
Well, I'll pass it along to the Secretary about your question, and he'll follow up.
And whatever, from a staff perspective, whatever formal way we can get these entered to be also. I also think it's a little tragic that the Undersecretary for Science would not be included in those discussions. So I certainly know that the science folks, the previous Department of Energy, were deeply involved. The Secretary has consistently referred to the resiliency and the reliability of the grid as the reason for the concern about the nuclear and coal power plant closures. When the Secretary uses power under Section 403 to appeal to FERC to bail out the coal companies in the name of resilience, FERC rejected that request. And now First Energy has asked the Secretary to invoke his 202C power under the Federal Power Act and prevent PJM, the electrical distributor, from retiring plants. Assistant Secretary Bruce Walker said the DOE would never use an emergency order under Section 202C, the Federal Power Act, to prop up an uneconomic generator. And PJM has demonstrated that the retirement of the plants do not affect the resilience of the grid. Republican FERC Commissioner Neil Chatterjee just yesterday said that the retirements will not impinge on resilience. And if First Energy's bailout is granted, it would raise the cost of electricity by $8 billion annually for consumers. It would discourage any investments in clean energy resources and begin the slippery slope of the federal government dictating the energy mix of states. So do you have any idea whether the Secretary intends to reject this bailout of First Energy?
So I can't comment on ongoing discussions specifically on that, but obviously it's an important aspect of what we do from a technology point of view regarding reliability and firm power. A lot of what we do at the department is evaluate and look at technologies associated with the changing energy mix. Obviously, taking baseload power off has an impact. That's an obvious point. And a lot of energy has been replaced with intermittent. We think it's appropriate for it to be reviewed, and it is being reviewed.
Great, thank you. And perhaps we can also send this question to the Secretary, too, on his intentions on the bailout.
We'll pass that question along, too, also, Congressman.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we know that a diverse grid incorporates renewables, but that their intermittent reliability, their intermittency is an issue, and that battery storage, especially grid-scale battery storage, is the key to this diverse and resilient grid that you talk about. Do you know, are you supportive, is the Secretary supportive of FERC Order 841 that directs the ISOs and the RTOs to develop market rules to more fully integrate energy storage as a resource on the electric grid?
Congressman, I can't comment specifically to the FERC order, but I could say that that in general, including battery storage as reliability backup to the electric grid, is an important technology that we're providing, and I think should get properly included in the market structure.
Yeah, I'm really impressed that AEP, which is or AES rather, which is headquartered in my district in Roslyn, just across the river. Their single biggest project right now is battery storage facility in California.
So
globally, so yeah.
So battery storage is a major focus of what we're looking at around commercialization, a much longer topic. But one of the things that we focused on around commercialization of what are the major technologies that we have, that you all and the taxpayers have allocated money. And the one area that we are attacking first is how do we accelerate the technologies that we've developed on new chemistries for batteries that could potentially be much better than lithium ion. The first event that we're doing, a first multi-lab event that we're doing on how to push forward stronger our technologies is on batteries. We're doing that at Stanford in conjunction with the university in our SLAC laboratory, where we're inviting all the labs together to meet with industry to figure out how do we take the next wave of technologies on batteries beyond lithium ion, as we like to call it, and how to move that forward for the country.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. DeBar. Can you give us an update on the approval, DOE's approval of the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative that's located in Aiken, South Carolina? And as you know, it's the intent is to have a workforce training of manufacturing jobs.
So I can repeat again that this is a high degree of focus for us. This is something that we are completely supportive of at the department. And we continue to work with OMB around getting the final approvals of this, and we certainly hope that we will be able to do that in the near future.
Do we have a timing that you would think?
I would hope it's quite near, but it's been quite near for a little while, and I can say it has a disproportionately high focus within the department compared to the cost.
Well, we appreciate that. Later this month, the committee will hold a hearing on technology that supports veterans. Here we'll include a witness from your department who will be providing us information on the MVP Champion program. It's very important to veterans. Can you give us some update on that?
Yes, Congressman. So just as people may know here, the Department of Energy has a long history in the bio area, in genomics, and with a very long history. And so this is quite consistent with what the department has done over time. One of the things that we have a great leadership role in the world is supercomputing and applying that to various different health topics, including around genomics. This is a program that we're continuing to move along, work with the VA and work with National Institutes of Health, and we continue to move that along, and as part of funding discussions as part of this budget.
And if you could provide this committee with information, updates, I guess, on it, on how it would be impacted and exactly what we'd be doing, and we'd appreciate it. And if there's anything that you think we can do as a Congress, we'd definitely like to know that.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll follow up with that detail, and it is an important area, and we'll get you that detail that would be helpful for your deliberations.
Right. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the big 1st District of Kansas, Dr. Marshall, for 5 minutes.
Yep. Thank you, Chairman. Let me start by saying thank you. Excuse me. The Secretary lined out several of your vision, your goals, stewardship, accountability, and service. And several of my folks back home in the energy sector have said, indeed, under this administration, things are going in a positive direction, especially my friends from the Cuyahoga, Kansas oil and gas industry expressed their gratitude. I've been waiting here so long, my throat got scratchy. The Secretary has been a leader to ensure resiliency of the electric grid and has proposed that several proposed actions that could favor fuels with on-site storage like nuclear and coal. How could this approach, how could it disadvantage natural gas in particular, which is currently the most affordable fuel on the market? And what steps is the department taking to invest in grid resiliency without picking winners and losers in the energy market?
Yes. So thank you, Congressman. I think it's been a long history of this country to have diversity. All the above is an important aspect to it. Obviously, natural gas has had significant improvements in technology, whether it's in turbine efficiency or production costs. And once again, we do feel is generally appropriate, as has been a bipartisan view of having diversity across all the energy types, and that we continue that. So we consider natural gas just as important as nuclear and coal. What other areas are we focused on around grid resiliency? This is a particularly interesting area for me as Undersecretary of Science. One particular area that we're focused on is in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Collecting data from the grid on all the different data points around weather, around wind, around solar intensity, around demand that's coming up the next day or the next week as a result of those coming through, all the capabilities of the power plants, the costs associated with it, and interconnections, is a great example of the applicability of machine learning for potential grid management. And we actually have a number of different machine learning algorithms on how to optimize the grid that will help resiliency, will help dispatch to lower costs. And it's a particularly very interesting area for us that, in addition to the points that the Secretary made earlier, that I wanted to point out on this important topic.
Okay. Next, I want to talk a little bit about low-dose radiation health risk. As a physician, it's been an area of concern. We certainly know that at some point there's an all-or-nothing phenomena for radiation, whether dealing with a pregnant woman or an adult. And we don't really know, where those limits are for low-dose radiation. And the House is proud that we passed H.R. 4675, the Low-Dose Radiation Research Act. Under the previous administration, research in this area was abruptly called to a stop for some reason. Can you commit today to restore the department's leadership in this field of science?
Congressman, as a user of low-dose radiation earlier in my nuclear engineering days, I'm completely sympathetic of the topic. We certainly have been discussing this. We've been getting up to speed on the past work that has been done. And should you appropriate that, exactly how we would take it forward. So should that happen, should you appropriate, we actually have specific ideas and plans. We're really focused on the genomics aspect, which is a bit new compared to the previous work and last administrations have focused on this topic, which is obviously an area of focus for and expertise for the department, should it be appropriated.
Right. I spent a little time exposed to some low-dose radiation myself in a nuclear reactor at Kansas State University. Lastly, I'd like to just talk about CFIUS for a second, in particular referring to Citgo. I don't know all the details, but I think Russia recently invested in Citgo. Some concern on my part about Russians owning refining industries in this country, and just wonder if the department has any concerns about this.
I apologize. I'm not the right person, but we can certainly follow up with that question.
Okay. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair wishes to thank both the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary for their testimony and the members for their questions. The record will remain open 2 weeks for additional written comments and questions from the members. This hearing is adjourned.
All right. They took your gavel away? Oh, that is sore.